Sitting by my window, I gaze out at the tranquil streets of Provence, the sun casting a golden hue over the quaint houses. My mind, however, travels back decades to a different time, a different life. I was just 20 when I met him. I murmur to myself, the memory of my late husband surfacing. He was so much older, yet charming in his own distinguished way. "Sarah, you were the belle of the ball," my friend Martha would often tease. I recall one such conversation we had years ago in our favorite cafe. "But, Martha, he was wealthy and complicated," I had replied, stirring my coffee nervously. "It wasn't just about the money." "Of course, dear, but that wealth did come with its burdens, didn't it?" Martha's eyes had a knowing glint. "Yes," I sighed. "The jealousy, the accusations. He never understood that I was loyal to him." The window reflects an older version of me now, 70 years old. I can hardly believe it. My thoughts drift to my son, Tony. "Tony was just a child when his father passed," I say to the empty room. "I tried to give him everything, perhaps too much." Martha had warned me about that too. "Spoiling him won't fill the void, Sarah. He needs you, not your gifts." But I didn't listen. The guilt of my husband's turbulent last years weighed on me. I thought material things could compensate for the emotional turmoil we had endured. How wrong I was. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across my room. I can't help but wonder, if I had done things differently, would Tony and I have been closer? Would my life have taken a different path? I close my eyes, letting the warm Provençal breeze drift through the window, carrying with it the bittersweet scents of my past. This journey back in time is painful, yet necessary. It's time to confront the ghosts of my yesteryears, to finally make peace with the choices I've made. I remember those days vividly, the air often thick with unspoken words. My husband, Edward, had grown increasingly possessive, his once endearing attentiveness turning into a suffocating jealousy. One evening, as we sat in the dimly lit drawing room, Edward's eyes narrowed at me over his half-moon glasses. "Sarah, I saw how John at the club looked at you today," he began, his voice low but edged with accusation. I sighed, setting down my embroidery. "Edward, please. John was just being polite. Nothing more." I tried to keep my voice calm, but my heart raced with frustration. He slammed his fist on the armrest, making me jump. "Polite? He was practically undressing you with his eyes. And you?" His voice trailed off, heavy with implications. "Edward, I have never given you reason to doubt me," I replied firmly, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. His distrust was unfounded, and it wounded me deeply. "You're a beautiful woman, Sarah. It's natural for men to want you, but I can't. I can't bear the thought of losing you," he confessed, his voice cracking with a vulnerability that momentarily softened my heart. I moved closer, taking his hands in mine. "You're not going to lose me, Edward. I married you for love, remember? Not for your wealth or status." He looked up, his eyes searching mine. "But what if you find someone better? Younger? More exciting?" I squeezed his hands gently. "There's no one better for me than you. You must believe that." My reassurance seemed to calm him, but the shadow of doubt never truly left his eyes. As the years waned on, the shadow of my husband's unfounded doubts and accusations grew longer and darker, casting a pall over our once happy home. Despite my unwavering fidelity and repeated assurances, his mistrust only deepened, eroding the foundation of our marriage. Then, in a sudden and quiet twist of fate, his life ebbed away, leaving me a widow draped in wealth and a legacy of unresolved grievances. I remember the morning after the funeral. The house felt unusually large and empty, the silence a heavy shroud around me. As I sat in the vast dining room, sipping my tea, the lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Sarah, as per your late husband's will, all his shares, the estate, and the accumulated wealth are now transferred to you and Tony," he said, his voice formal and distant. I looked up, the weight of his words sinking in. "All of it. To us?" I murmured, more to myself than to him. Yes, ma'am. You are now, quite possibly, the wealthiest woman in the district, Mr. Jenkins confirmed, adjusting his glasses. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. I don't know if I should be happy or... My voice trailed off, lost in a sea of conflicting emotions. It's a considerable responsibility, Mrs. Sarah, but I assure you, Tony and you will be well taken care of, he reassured me, but his words sounded empty. At that moment, Tony burst into the room, his young face flushed with excitement. Mom, is it true? Are we really rich now? He asked, his eyes wide with innocence and anticipation. I forced a smile, masking the turmoil inside me. Yes, Tony, we are. But remember, money doesn't bring happiness. He laughed, a carefree sound that stung my heart. Oh, come on, Mom. We can have anything we want now, right? I nodded slowly, a sense of foreboding creeping over me. Yes, but we must be wise about it. Your father worked hard for this. Tony shrugged, already losing interest in the conversation. Sure, Mom. Can I go play outside now? As he ran off, his laughter echoing through the halls, I felt a deep sense of unease. The wealth was overwhelming, a burden that came with immense responsibility. I wondered if I could ever fill the void left by my husband, or if the riches would only widen the gap between me and my son. Mrs. Sarah, if you need any assistance managing the estate, I'm at your service, Mr. Jenkins offered. I nodded, my mind adrift in a sea of thoughts. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I might just take you up on that. Inheriting the vast fortune left by my husband, I found myself engulfed in a world of opulence, yet haunted by a profound solitude that wealth couldn't dispel. It was in this gilded yet hollow existence that I poured my attention and resources into Tony, seeking to fill the void with lavish gifts and indulgences, unaware that this would set the stage for his troubled journey into adulthood. I remember walking into Tony's room, filled with the latest toys and gadgets. He was just 8 then, his eyes always sparkled with excitement. But that day was different. Mom, look at this, Tony exclaimed, holding up a model airplane. His room was a testament to my guilt and his father's absence, every corner crammed with gifts. I smiled, though a pang of sadness tugged at my heart. It's wonderful, Tony. You must love it. He nodded, but his smile faded quickly. It's great, but... Can we go to the park today? Just you and me? I hesitated, thinking of the mountain of work waiting for me, a reminder of the empire I had to uphold. I have a lot of work today, sweetheart, but this weekend, I promise. Tony's shoulders slumped. You always say that, Mom, but it's okay. I can play with my toys. I reached out, tugging him into a hug. I'm sorry, Tony. I wish I could... My voice trailed off, burdened by unspoken regrets. He hugged back, his small arms surprisingly strong. It's okay, Mom. I know you're busy. Dad used to say running a business is tough. The mention of his father brought a fresh wave of guilt. Your dad, he wanted the best for us, Tony. Tony pulled away, looking up at me with those big, innocent eyes. I miss him. Do you miss him too? Tears welled up in my eyes. Every day, Tony, every single day. He took my hand, his grip firm. Then let's make a promise. Let's spend time together, just like Dad would have wanted. I squeezed his hand, nodding. I promise, Tony, we'll make time, just you and me. That promise, made in a room filled with material wealth but lacking in what truly mattered, haunted me for years. I realized too late that time was the most precious gift I could give my son, a gift I had withheld for far too long. As Tony grew, so did the distance between us, his life becoming a mirror of wealth and privilege, yet lacking the warmth of familial closeness. Despite my attempts to bridge the gap with material comforts, our relationship became a silent tableau of missed connections and unspoken emotions, setting the stage for a deepening divide as he stepped into his own life. When Tony turned 20, it was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air felt like a mix of nostalgia and new beginnings. I stood in the expansive living room of our family home, a room too large for just the two of us, holding a small, exquisitely wrapped box. It was Tony's birthday gift. "Happy birthday, Tony," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the emptiness of the room. Tony looked up from his phone, a fleeting smile crossing his face. "Thanks, Mom," he replied, his attention already drifting back to his screen. I extended the gift towards him, feeling the weight of the unspoken words between us. "I thought you might like this," I ventured. He accepted the gift, unwrapping it with a practiced detachment. Inside was a vintage watch, one I knew he'd admired in a magazine. His eyes lit up for a moment, a glimpse of the young boy who used to revel in surprises. "It's nice, Mom. Really nice," he said, his words measured. I tried to bridge the gap widening between us. "Tony, is everything okay? You seem distant?" He sighed, setting the watch aside. "It's just life, Mom. I've got a lot on my mind, that's all." I stepped closer, the maternal instinct in me aching to comfort him. "Is there anything I can do? Anything you want to talk about?" Tony stood up, a polite smile plastered on his face. "I appreciate it, Mom, but I'm fine. Really. I should get going. Got plans with friends." "Of course," I replied, trying to mask the disappointment in my voice. I miss our talks, Tony. I miss us." He paused at the door, a hint of something unspoken in his gaze. "I know, Mom. I do too. But things change, right? That's life." And with those words, he left, leaving me standing in the silence of our home, holding on to the hope that one day, the distance between us would close. But deep down, I feared that the chasm was only widening, and I was powerless to stop it. It was a crisp morning in April when I made the life-changing decision to move to France. I sat in my opulent, yet eerily silent living room, sipping my tea, the memories of my son Tony's distant expressions haunting me. The phone rang, slicing through the quiet. It was Claire, my dearest friend since college days. "Sarah, I have something to tell you." Claire's voice trembled. I could sense something was wrong. "What is it, Claire? You sound upset," I replied, my heart racing. It's cancer, Sarah. They say it's advanced." Her words hit me like a freight train. After a pause, filled with a shared sorrow, I found my voice. "I'm coming to France, Claire. I'll help you through this." "But, Sarah, your life, your son," she protested weakly. "Tony has his own life now. It's time I make a change too. You're not alone in this, Claire." 2 weeks later, I stood at the airport, my suitcase an emblem of my new journey. Tony came to see me off, his demeanor cool but polite. "Why France, Mom? And why now?" he asked, his voice devoid of warmth. I looked into his eyes, searching for a spark of the son I once knew. "Claire needs me, Tony, and maybe I need this too. A change." "You always were impulsive," he said, almost accusingly. "Maybe," I conceded, "but sometimes life requires us to be." He nodded, the faintest hint of understanding in his eyes. "Take care of yourself, Mom." I hugged him, feeling the rigidness in his posture. "You too, Tony. Remember, this is not goodbye. It's just a different path." Boarding the plane, I felt a mix of emotions. Guilt for leaving Tony, yet a sense of liberation. The unknown of France beckoned me, promising a respite and a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Leaving behind the complexities of my life with Tony, I embarked on a journey to France, a decision fueled by the desire to support my ailing friend and perhaps find solace in a change of scenery. In the rustic charm of Provence, amidst vineyards and ancient stone houses, I began to rediscover a sense of peace and purpose, far removed from the opulent but lonely life I had known. When I arrived in Provence, the air was filled with the scent of lavender and a sense of peace I hadn't known for years. "Sarah, welcome to your new home," exclaimed Marie, my friend battling cancer, as she greeted me outside the quaint house nestled on the outskirts. "Marie, it's beautiful here," I said, my eyes taking in the sprawling lavender fields that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Yes, it's serene, isn't it?" Marie smiled weakly, but genuinely. Come, let me show you around. As we wandered through the small rustic house, Marie's enthusiasm was infectious. Despite her illness, she radiated a strength and zest for life. I've always dreamed of living in a place like this, she confessed as we settled in the cozy living room. I can see why, I replied, looking out the window at the picturesque view. It feels like a different world here. We spent our days savoring simple pleasures, walking through the fields, taking photographs, and relishing the local wine. Marie's laughter, though often interrupted by coughs, was a sound I had come to cherish. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, Marie turned to me. Sarah, I can't thank you enough for being here. I know it wasn't easy leaving everything behind. I took her hand, feeling the fragility of her bones. Marie, you're not just a friend, you're family. I couldn't have been anywhere else. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I worry about you, though. After I'm gone, you'll be alone. I squeezed her hand. I'll be okay. Being here, with you, it's made me realize there's more to life than wealth and material things. Marie smiled softly. I'm glad to hear that. Remember, Sarah, life is about the moments we cherish, not the possessions we accumulate. Those words stayed with me, echoing in my heart long after her voice faded away. Marie's presence in my life, brief as it was, taught me more about living than I had learned in all my 70 years. And as I scattered her ashes over the lavender field a year later, I knew she had become a part of this land she loved so dearly, just as she had become an indelible part of me. In Provence, I found a tranquil refuge, healing in the embrace of nature and the simplicity of rural life, away from the ghosts of my past. Yet, as the days turned to months and months to years, a growing sense of unfinished business and a longing for reconciliation with Tony compelled me to leave my haven and return to the U.S., stepping back into a world I had left behind. Returning to the U.S., my heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and dread. The old, familiar streets whispered tales of the past, but I wondered if my son, Tony, would welcome these echoes of a bygone era. As I approached our old house, I hesitated at the door, my hand trembling slightly. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The creaking sound seemed louder than I remembered. Inside, I found Tony in the living room, his eyes lifting to meet mine. His gaze was distant, like he was looking at a stranger. "Hello, Tony," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He stood up slowly, the lines on his face more pronounced than in my memories. "Mother," he said flatly, "you're back." "Yes, I wanted to see you, and..." My words trailed off as I saw the lack of warmth in his eyes. Alice, his wife, entered the room, her expression mirroring Tony's. "Sarah," she greeted, her voice devoid of warmth. I extended my arms, a gesture of reconciliation, but Tony didn't move. "I missed you," I said, hoping for a response. Tony shifted uncomfortably. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" His tone was more accusatory than curious. I faltered, feeling the weight of his unspoken accusations. I thought it would be a pleasant surprise." Alice scoffed softly. "Surprises are not always pleasant, Sarah." The air was thick with unspoken words and years of distance. I glanced around, hoping to find some familiarity in the surroundings. "I see you've kept the house the same," I ventured, trying to lighten the mood. Tony shrugged. "It's just a house." I felt a pang of sadness. This house was once filled with laughter and love, at least in my memories. "I hope to reconnect, to be part of the family again," I said, more to myself than to them. "We have our lives, Sarah. You chose to leave," Tony said, his voice cold. Alice nodded in agreement. "We've managed without you. We don't need handouts or surprises." Their words stung, but I masked my pain with a smile. "I understand. I just wanted to see you." Tony sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We should talk about where you'll stay." The implication was clear. I was an outsider here. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Of course, I'll figure something out. As I retreated to my old room, the weight of their rejection settled heavily on my shoulders. The walls echoed with the ghosts of the past, a stark reminder of the distance time had created. The walls of the house I once called home seemed to close in on me. Living with Tony and Alice became a silent ballet of avoidance and forced politeness. One evening, I mustered the courage to break the ice. I found Tony in the living room, his eyes glued to the TV. "Tony," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "What about Mom?" "It's just, I feel like there's a canyon between us. I want to understand, to help." Tony sighed, turning off the TV. "Help? Mom, you left. You chose to be away when I needed you most." His words stung. I thought I was doing the right thing. For you. For me? Or for your guilt? Tony's voice was rising. "You can't just come back and expect everything to be fine." I felt tears prickling my eyes. "I know I made mistakes, but I'm here now. Isn't there a way we can start mending our relationship?" He shook his head. "You don't get it, do you? It's not that simple." Alice entered the room, her eyes darting between us. "What's going on here?" "Nothing," Tony muttered. "Just the same old story." I looked at Alice, hoping for an ally. "Alice, I just want to reconnect with my son. I feel like an outsider in my own home." Alice hesitated, then said, "Sarah, we've moved on. Things have changed. Maybe it's better if you find a new place to stay." Her words felt like a slap. "A new place? This is my home, Alice." Tony stood up, his expression hardening. "Mom, maybe Alice is right. Maybe it's time for you to move on." I felt a deep ache in my heart. My own son, asking me to leave. I realized then that the gulf between us was wider than I had feared. This house, once filled with love and laughter, now echoed with the pain of broken bonds. I had always believed that truth, no matter how painful, was better than a comfortable lie. As I stood in my son's home, a sense of foreboding filled me. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss with Tony's wife, Alice. The way she avoided my gaze, the tension in her voice, it all pointed to something hidden. One afternoon, I decided to confront my fears. I approached Tony in the living room, where he was leafing through a magazine. "Tony, can we talk?" I asked, my voice hesitant. He looked up, his expression guarded. "What is it, Mom?" "It's about Alice," I started, unsure how to proceed. "I sense something's not right. Is everything okay between you two?" Tony's face hardened. "Why would you think something's wrong? You just got here, Mom. You don't know anything about our lives." His defensive tone struck a chord in me. "I'm your mother, Tony. I may not have been the best one, but I can tell when my son is unhappy." He scoffed, turning away. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered. The conversation was going nowhere. I decided to take a different approach. The next day, while Tony was at work, I spoke to Alice. "Alice, dear, can we talk?" I asked, finding her in the kitchen. She looked surprised, but nodded. "Sure, Sarah. What's on your mind?" "I've noticed some tension between you and Tony." "I'm worried," I said, trying to sound as non-confrontational as possible. Alice laughed, a little too loudly. "Tension? Oh, Sarah, you're imagining things. We're perfectly fine." But her eyes betrayed her, darting away from mine. I knew then that my suspicions were true. Later that week, my fears were confirmed. I accidentally overheard a conversation between Alice and a man I didn't recognize. Their intimate tones, the way she laughed at his jokes. It was clear there was more than just friendship between them. I was torn. Should I tell Tony? Would he even believe me? But as a mother, I couldn't let my son live a lie. That evening, I sat down with him. "Tony, there's something I need to tell you about Alice," I began, my heart heavy. He looked at me, a frown forming on his face. "What about her?" I took a deep breath. "I overheard her talking to another man. It sounded intimate." Tony's expression changed from confusion to anger. "You're lying," he exclaimed. "Why would you say something like that?" "I'm not lying, Tony. I heard it with my own ears," I insisted, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't believe you. You've always been jealous of Alice. You're trying to ruin my marriage." I reached out to him, tears in my eyes. "Tony, please, I'm only trying to protect you." But he was already walking away, his back to me. I knew then that I had opened a Pandora's box, one that could not be closed easily. As I sat there, alone, I couldn't help but wonder if I had done the right thing. But deep down, I knew I had no choice. The truth, no matter how painful, had to be faced. The revelation of Alice's betrayal, like a storm breaking the silence of a long, oppressive summer, shattered the fragile veneer of our family life, exposing hidden truths and unspoken resentments. In the wake of this tumult, I made the heart-wrenching decision to leave, feeling both the weight of my past mistakes and the liberation of letting go, as I sought to find a new purpose beyond the confines of broken relationships. It was a crisp autumn morning when I decided to leave. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow in the room that felt so alien to me now. I sat at the edge of my bed, my suitcase open and half-packed. Each item I placed inside felt like a step further away from a life I once knew. I heard footsteps approaching, and Tony's voice, hesitant yet firm, reached my ears. "Mom, what are you doing?" I turned, meeting his gaze. "I'm leaving, Tony. It's time for me to go." His brows furrowed, confusion and hurt mingling in his eyes. "But why? You just got here." I sighed, the weight of years of disconnect between us pressing down on me. "I don't belong here, Tony. I thought I could mend things, but I was wrong." He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorway. "Is this about Alice?" I shook my head. "It's not just about her. It's about us, our relationship. It's broken, and I can't fix it." Tony's voice softened. "Mom, I know we've had our differences, but—" I interrupted him. "Tony, I've made my decision." Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a check. "This is for you. It's the last of what I had. Use it wisely." He looked at the check, then back at me, a mix of emotions crossing his face. "I don't want your money, Mom. I wanted you." The pain in his voice stung me. "I wanted to be there for you too, Tony, but sometimes wanting isn't enough." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "Where will you go?" "Back to France. I left a part of my heart there." I zipped up my suitcase and stood up, feeling an odd sense of finality. Tony stepped forward, his expression torn. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything." I smiled sadly, a tear escaping my eye. "I am too, my dear. I hope one day you'll understand why I had to do this." We stood there, in the room filled with memories, the gap between us too vast to bridge with words or gestures. Finally, I picked up my suitcase and walked past him, pausing for a moment to squeeze his hand. "Goodbye, Tony. Take care of yourself." And with that, I walked out of the door, leaving behind a chapter of my life that was filled with as much sorrow as it was with love. After my departure, I often found myself wondering about Tony. My heart ached, but I knew it was the right decision. The news of his life reached me in fragments, whispers from old acquaintances and distant relatives. One evening, as I sat in my quiet living room in France, I received a call from an old friend, Martha. "Sarah, it's about Tony." Martha's voice was heavy with concern. "What happened?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. He's not doing well. After you left, things spiraled. He lost the house," she said softly. "The house?" I gasped, the walls of our family home flashing before my eyes. "Yes, he had to sell it. Financial troubles. And Alice left him." The news hit me like a wave. "I can't believe this. Did he say anything about me?" Martha hesitated. "He's angry, Sarah. He blames you for a lot. Says you abandoned him, meddled in his life." I felt a sting in my heart. "I only wanted what's best for him." I know, dear, but he's struggling to see that. He's taken a job at a local garage. It's hard for him. A garage? My Tony, who never had to lift a finger, working like that. It pained me. Does he need help? I asked, the mother in me speaking. Martha was silent for a moment. He's too proud to ask, but maybe, deep down, he still needs his mother. The call ended with a promise from Martha to keep me updated. I sat there, staring into the fading light, my mind racing with memories of Tony as a child, his laughter, his cries. How had it come to this? I pondered over my next step. Should I reach out? Would he even want to hear from me? The uncertainty was overwhelming, but the love for my son never waned. Despite everything, he was still my Tony, and I, his mother, ached to see him at peace. I stood by the window of my small house in Provence, the lavender fields stretching out like a purple sea before me. The phone rang, breaking the silence of the afternoon. I hesitated before answering. "Bonjour, Sarah," greeted Marie, the director of the local charity I had recently started supporting. "I wanted to thank you for your generous donation. It's making a huge difference." I smiled faintly. "It's the least I could do, Marie. Helping others, it gives me a sense of purpose." There was a warmth in Mary's voice. "You know, you've become quite a topic of conversation around here. Everyone's grateful." The conversation shifted to the upcoming charity event. We discussed the details, and I offered to help with the organization. As I hung up, the weight of loneliness felt a bit lighter. Later, as I walked through the town, the shopkeepers greeted me with newfound respect. "Bonjour, Madame Sarah," they'd call out, and I'd nod, a sense of belonging slowly seeping in. That evening, my neighbor, Jacques, an elderly gentleman with a kind smile, stopped by. He often did, bringing a bottle of local wine or some freshly baked bread. "Sarah, you seem more at peace these days," he observed as we sat in my small garden. I poured us both a glass of wine, the rich aroma reminding me of days long gone. "I suppose I am, Jacques. I've realized that life, it's about the connections we make, the help we offer." Jacques nodded, sipping his wine thoughtfully. "True. And you, my friend, have made quite an impact. Not just with your money, but with your presence." I looked out over the garden, the last rays of the sun casting a golden glow. I used to think wealth and family were everything, but now I see there's more to life. Helping those in need, being part of a community. It's given me a reason to wake up each day. Jacques raised his glass. "To new beginnings, Sarah." "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. As the stars began to twinkle in the Provençal sky, I felt a sense of contentment. Maybe this was where I was meant to be all along, not in the shadows of my past, but in the light of a purposeful present. Sitting alone in my quaint house in Provence, I gazed out at the lavender fields, the soft purple hues blending with the sunset. The phone beside me rang, breaking the silence. I smiled, recognizing the number. "Bonjour, Sarah," greeted Marie, the director of the cancer charity I supported. "Your donation has helped so many." I felt a warmth in my heart. "I'm glad to hear that, Marie. It's what my friend would have wanted." There was a pause, filled with unspoken understanding. "And how are you, Sarah?" I sighed, looking at a photo of Tony as a child on the mantel. "I'm managing. I've had a lot of time to think about my life, about the choices I made." Marie's voice softened. "It's never easy, but you've made a positive impact here." "Yes, but at the cost of my relationship with my son," I confessed, my voice tinged with regret. "Have you heard from Tony recently?" she inquired gently. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see. "No, and I don't expect to. Our last encounter was challenging." "You did what you thought was best, Sarah. Sometimes that's all we can do." I glanced at the lavender field again, thinking of my late friend and her unfulfilled dreams. I just wish I had realized sooner that money and gifts weren't substitutes for time and love. "You've learned and grown, Sarah. That's important." I smiled slightly. "Yes, I have." And now, I find joy in helping others. It's not the same as family, but it's fulfilling in its own way. Marie's voice was warm. That's a beautiful way to live your life, Sarah. As we said our goodbyes, I turned off the phone and sat in silence. The lavender swayed gently in the breeze, a reminder of cycles and seasons. My life hadn't gone as planned, but in its twilight, I found a different kind of contentment. A life not defined by wealth or family, but by the peace found in solitude and the joy of giving.